Before we get serious this morning, I have a wonderful Unitarian joke to share with you. A Unitarian woman attended an ecumenical women's retreat, and the first evening she found herself seated with 3 other women. None of them knew each other. The 3 women were Catholic, she was Unitarian. And after introductions, they began to talk a little bit about their families. The first Catholic woman said, "Well, I have a son, and I am very, very proud of him. He's a priest. And you know, when he walks into a room, people look at him and say, 'Father.'" The second Catholic woman said, "Oh, this is really interesting because I have a son who's a priest and he's a bishop. And when he walks into a room, people look at him and say, 'Your Grace.'" The third Catholic woman said, "This is utterly amazing. I have a son and he's a cardinal. When he enters a room, people look at him and say, 'Your Eminence.'" And then the 3 Catholics looked at the Unitarian. And with a smile on her face and a twinkle in her eye, she said, "Well, let me tell you about my son. He's a very handsome young man. He's 6'2", a bodybuilder, and my son is a male stripper. When he walks into a room, all the women turn and say, 'My God.'" I am so glad you laughed because you never know. I have a question, and I'd like to ask it of that side of the congregation. A little boy, 8 years old, is diagnosed with inoperable brain cancer. What happens next? And now a question for this side of the congregation. His father, understandably frantic, shares the information with a trusted friend who happens to be a New York City Zen Master. What happens next? Well, here's exactly what did happen. One day that son woke up complaining about a headache, 8 years old. It was a little unusual, but his father, and the father's name is John David Lurie, assumed it was merely a sinus infection and treated it accordingly. But when the headache didn't ease up and in fact became far more severe, they visited one doctor and then another, and tests were done, and finally a brain scan revealed a tumor in a location which made complete surgical removal impossible. The doctors furthermore told John David, the father, that your son has a microscopic chance of living another 60 months, 5 years. John David was discouraged and despondent. At that time, and this is several decades ago, he was studying Zen Buddhism and meeting weekly with a Zen Master in New York, and the man had become his friend. At their next session, he tearfully shared the information with the Zen Master, and his teacher was normally a very quiet, shy, reserved, gentle man. And after he listened to just a few sentences come out of John David's mouth, the Zen Master stiffened up in his chair. And here's how he spoke to him. "John David, how dare you collapse in self-pity? John David, this is no time to begin grieving because your son's very life depends on you to think creatively and do everything you can to help him." And then, raising his voice even higher, he almost shouted at his student, "John David, rouse up every ounce of energy you have and step up to this great challenge." To the father's credit, it became a wake-up call. This is in the 1970s. He left that encounter with a new energy and vision. He researched out possible treatments, the best treatments, along with alternative therapies, which were not as readily available then as they are now. And the end result is that his son is now a grown man with a child of his own. But let me tell you about the Zen Master, who spoke so strongly, and to some people it would appear harsh. However, the Zen Master did not speak out of anger. He acted on a foundational teaching of the Buddha, who said, and this is what I want you to hear, the Buddha said, discouragement is just a form of laziness. Discouragement is just a form of laziness. Now, my assignment today at the church is to talk about sloth, and if you look it up in a dictionary, literally it means an aversion to work, laziness. Furthermore, in some listings of the 7 deadly sins, number 6, that's the one I'm to talk about, which is sloth, shows up as discouragement. And what that means is that the wise sages who put those lists together are indicating that discouragement, which is a universal and very real human experience, can be a serious danger which needs to be monitored carefully. So what I want to do this morning together with you is be extremely practical and extremely positive. And my theme is dealing with discouragement. And just so that I myself can be as clear as I know how, I have 4 points, and that's all. And to make it even easier, each one of my points begins with the letter A. So, if this happened to be a Sesame Street program, one of the Muppets would come up and say, ladies and gentlemen, today's sermon is brought to you by the letter A. Dealing with discouragement, the first A is audit. Audit your attitude. One of the most effective ways to do that is by asking yourself some good questions, because a good question can open you up and move you into a better place. And here are some questions to ask when you're feeling discouraged, really discouraged. Ask yourself, am I turning what is a problem into a big disaster? Ask yourself, am I amplifying a difficulty? And this one I really like. Ask yourself, am I moving myself from trauma with a T to drama with a D? Because if any of those things are going on, all you have to do is stop it. The attitude we bring to bear on our issue can either magnify it so that it becomes unbearable, or it can minimize it so that it becomes manageable. The poet John Milton correctly observed that our mind can make a heaven out of hell or a hell out of heaven. The choice is ours. In the 1970s, there was a young man in England named Peter Betts. He was different from his friends who were more interested in materialism, consumerism, and so on. Peter wanted to pursue something of a spiritual life and was not satisfied with what he was experiencing in England, so he did what many people did in the 70s. He hitchhiked and made his way to Southeast Asia, first India, and then he ended up in Thailand. And there he joined a Buddhist monastery, planning to become a monk in the Thai forest tradition. He eventually did, but it wasn't easy, and it wasn't without a lot of discouraging moments. He tells about one of those after he had been at the monastery just a few months. And the monastic setting that he was in, the monks were not allowed to employ anyone else for labor. So if something had to be done, they had to do it. Plumbing, electricity, building. The monastery grew, and the abbot said, we need a new meditation hall. And he instructed the monks to go ahead and begin building it. They did. And when it was all over, there was a huge mound of earth left on the grounds. So the abbot looked at it one day and he said, monks, it's really unattractive. I want you to move it over there. Now, they didn't have any mechanical equipment. This was going to be done by wheelbarrow and shovel, so they did. It took many monks 3 whole days of work, from 9 in the morning, he says, until 10 p.m. They got up at 5 for meditation for 4 hours, had a breakfast, and then did heavy-duty labor. When the whole pile was moved, they were quite satisfied, and just at that moment, the head abbot was called away to deal with an emergency at another monastery, and an associate was brought in to be in charge. When he saw where they had moved the earth, he said, "You know what? I think we put it in the wrong place. You put it in the wrong place." I believe he meant for it to be there. So the second time, using wheelbarrows and shovels, these monks worked from 9 in the morning till 10 at night, moving it. Then the head monk returned. This is a true story. And when he saw where the dirt was, he screamed at them and said, "What is this? This is ugly. I said there, not there." And so for the third time, they had to move it. Now, by this time, Betts was mad. He said no one in the monastery understood English, so I was pushing my wheelbarrow, but I was cursing. I was cursing the monk, the assistant, this monastery, my life. And an interesting thing happened. The other monks who knew no English didn't need to know English to see this man is freaking out. One of them came to him and in broken English, he said, "Peter, pushing the wheelbarrow is easy. How you think about it is what makes it hard." Peter, pushing the wheelbarrow is easy. How you think about it is what makes it hard. That helped him. But take that concept, those words, apply it into your situation. Listen, being unemployed isn't difficult. How I think about it makes it hard. Being divorced isn't difficult. How I think about it is what makes it hard. And for me, you know what I've been saying to myself this week? Giving a sermon at All Souls isn't hard. How I think about it is making it very hard. So the first day, audit your attitude. The second day, ask. You know, Jesus offers a pretty simple and direct teaching. He says, ask and you will receive. Now, the reason he says that, and all of the spiritual sages that I know stress the importance of asking for help, and they say that because they know that asking is actually a sign of integrity and intelligence. It means that the person who is asking is committed to his or her personal growth and evolution. They're not going to just sit back and take life the way it comes at them. They're going to get help. In spite of the teachings, we hesitate to ask, and I know why. I've been there too. Perhaps we're embarrassed. It feels like a sign of weakness. We believe other people will think less of us. And yet, if we can get the courage and step up and ask a wise person for some guidance, instruction, assistance, it can pay off. A couple of months ago, I was scanning on my computer the New York Times, and there was a write-up, an obituary that caught my eye because it said, Bob Fletcher dies, 101. And I thought, who is Bob Fletcher? To have a New York Times writer write up an obituary, you need to be a person of note, someone famous. And usually when I scan those, the name rings a bell. Bob Fletcher dies at 101? Never heard of him. I can see why he was written up, and let me tell you the story. After the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, our government forced 120,000 Japanese Americans on the West Coast out of their homes and businesses into internment camps for the duration of the war. Very bleak moment in our history. If a Japanese American had a mortgage, or if they had a business, it was lost. By the time they came back, no one kept up with the payments, and they had nothing. There was a man in California who was about to be rounded up, and his first name was Al, because he was an American citizen of Japanese ancestry, Al Tsukamoto. His family came to California in 1904, and by hard work and saving, they bought what was originally just some acres of dirt. They turned it into a family fruit farm. And Mr. Tsukamoto knew he was about to be rounded up, and he just did not want to abandon that farm and see his business, his family business, destroyed. So he looked around to see if he could find a friendly American face. Now, it's 1941, and that was hard to find. California had a very unhealthy history of a relationship with people from Japan. The Japanese had just bombed Pearl Harbor However, Tsukamoto remembered a young man, Bob Fletcher. He was 29 years of age. He worked for the state of California as a state and farm inspector. And he remembered that Mr. Fletcher had always been friendly, respectful, courteous to him and his family. And so he approached Bob Fletcher with a business proposition. He said, "Bob, would you be willing to operate my family farm? All I want you to do is pay the taxes, keep up the mortgage, and in return, you can keep all of the profits and just keep the thing running until we are no longer confined." Fletcher agreed to do that. He quit his job, and for the next 3 years, he operated that farm. He worked 18 hours a day. Faithfully, he paid the taxes, kept up with the mortgage payments, and only took 1/2 of the profits. The other half he put into a savings account for Tsukamoto and his family. Even though Al Tsukamoto told Fletcher he could live in his house, Mr. Fletcher opted to live in a crude bunkhouse that had been built for migrant workers. And when Bob Fletcher was married a few months later, he and his new bride both lived in the bunkhouse and every week cleaned the Tsukamoto home so it would be neat and tidy and ready for their return. When the war was over, whereas most Japanese American families lost their property and businesses, Tsukamoto came back in 1945 astounded. He not only had his family farm, but he had a big pile of money in the bank. And he had that not merely because Fletcher deposited half the profits and not merely because Fletcher ran the farm, but mainly because Al Tsukamoto had the guts to ask for help. "Would you run my farm?" Asking is a sign of intelligence and integrity. Third one, third A. Act, and then add this word, skillfully. Have you ever done something when you were upset or discouraged or said something and then looked back and thought, that was really stupid? Now, you know that word stupid is an interesting word. It comes from the Latin, stupidus, and it literally means struck senseless. The Buddha talked a lot about the importance of being skillful in life. It appears over and over in his teachings, and in one setting, it looks to me like he had a group of monks who were pretty stupid. Because listen to how he teaches them. He almost talks to them like you're in grade school. Monks. Abandon what is unskillful, because what is unskillful is not conducive to your benefit and pleasure. And then chapters later, the same thing shows up again as if they didn't get the message. So again, it shows up, monks. Look, develop what is skillful, because if you do that, it will be conducive to your benefit and pleasure. Act skillfully. And yet, so often when we fall into discouragement, it's easy to do exactly not that. Have you heard the story of a Baptist minister? His church finances were in shambles. The congregation was dwindling. Offerings were down. And every month they were in the red, and the debt was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And this troubled him so much he had trouble sleeping. And little by little, really, he didn't realize it, but he was being struck senseless. One restless evening he had a dream. And in the dream, 5 angels appeared to him, and each angel had 5 bags of gold. And when he woke up, he thought, whoa, that was a weird dream. I wonder what that's all about. And then when he went down into the kitchen, the Baptist minister's wife, he noticed his wife was making breakfast for the family. She'd fried 5 eggs. And along with the 5 eggs, there were 5 pieces of toast on the table. When he picked up the paper, it said May 5th, 5/5. He thought, whoa, God is sending me a message. And he scanned the paper that morning, and he noticed that just up the street from his church, a racetrack was opening. And it was called the Lucky Racetrack, and he spelled it out, L-U-C-K-Y, 5 letters. Furthermore, he noticed that race 5, horse 5, was called 5 angels, just like his dream. So he withdrew all the money he had and maxed out his credit cards. He ended up with $5,000. He went to the racetrack. There he approached the 5th bookmaker, placed $5,000 on horse 5, race 5 on a horse named 5 Angels. And he thought to himself, the dream can't be wrong, the number can't be wrong. And he was right. His horse came in 5th. Act skillfully. Last one, the last A, attach yourself to hope. Never disconnect yourself from that lifeline which is called hope. And I know that when we get discouraged and really down, it's hard to be hopeful about anything. Yet, hold on to it. The author Anne Lamott has spent a lot of time in the grips of discouragement, and here's what she's discovered about hope. She said it really begins in the dark. She said it's a stubborn hope which tells you if you just show up and try to do the right thing, the dawn will come. She said it's kind of hope where you wait, you watch, you work, and you just don't give up. Recently, I read a column in Dear Abby. A woman wrote her and identified herself only as alive and 35 in North Carolina. She begins her story by saying to Abby, I hope you'll print my letter and help me deliver an important message. And then the background to her message is a life filled with just a lot of bad luck, bad choices, and bad consequences. Alive and 35 says she left school at 15 because she was pregnant. By the time she was 18, she had 2 sons she put up for adoption. By the age of 25, she was on a 3rd marriage and had a baby girl. By the time she was 26, she had cancer. The treatment caused her to lose her hair, lose 30 pounds, lose her daughter, lose her husband, who abandoned all of them and took the little girl with him. She says, it took me a year to track him down and regain custody of the child. I married a 4th time, another loser. Finally, I went back to college, graduated, married number 5. Now, can you see the determination there? This is a woman that really wants to get it right. Married the 5th guy, and then cancer came back, and here's what she says. Life is good. My current husband, this is now number 5, and guys, I want you to hear this. My current husband is the most supportive, kind, generous man in the world. He is my friend, my lover, my car mechanic, my plumber, my electrician, appliance repairman, and nurse. He's a wonderful father to my daughter who adores him. He attends all the school recitals, sends me flowers for no reasons. Abby, even my dog loves this guy. The message that she wants to convey, tell your readers, hang in there. No matter where you are or where you've been, there's always someplace else left to go, and going forward is the best option. Now let me put my interpretation on her experience, and this is from a Buddhist perspective. Like her, do not mistake your present situation as your permanent situation, because life is incredibly impermanent. And what you feel and where you are now is not where you're going to be a month from now, 6 months from now, or a year from now. Life is incredibly impermanent. You know, I think that may be what Winston Churchill had in mind when he ever so famously said, never, 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 ever give up. It may be what the ancient sage Confucius had in mind when he said, it doesn't matter how slowly you go as long as you don't stop. It may be what America's first best-selling author, Harriet Beecher Stowe, had in mind when she said, never give up, because that is just the time when the tide will turn. And it may be what legendary coach Vince Lombardi had in mind when he said, let me tell you what winning means. You're willing to go longer, work harder, give more. And finally, it may be what the artist Dolly Parton had in mind when she said, the way I see it, if you want the rainbow, You got to put up with the rain. Discouragement is indeed a form of laziness. So let's not go there. Let's deal with it. Audit, ask, act, attach. Thank you.